course, I'm going to use a fucking bandsaw as soon as I start. Hello everyone, welcome to Human Sphere History. I'm your host, Commissar Wood, and today we're going to be talking about Ariadna. And there's no place to start with Ariadna except for Project Dawn. Project Dawn was the name of the most ambitious space colonizing enterprise of the first century of the third millennium. The fortuitous discovery of an extraterrestrial object dominated GA 6037283, the first viable wormhole known to humanity. Project Dawn was a joint effort between NASA, European, and Russian space agencies. The initial phase of the project involved launching a probe through a wormhole and then retrieving it. The probe came back from the other side with preliminary analysis of the planetary system identified as Delta Pavonis. This was immediately followed by the use of a second double probe, the Lewis and Clark, with the goal of gathering further data about the system and ascertaining the potential for terraformation of the planets therein. Luckily, the biophysical reports on the fourth planet assured its suitability for colonization. This planet was called Dawn, to symbolize the dawn of the new age of humanity. A worldwide media campaign congratulated itself for the success of finding a new home for the human race, and vowed to dedicate all necessary resources to colonization. This opened the door to the design and construction of Ariadna, a massive seed ship intended to take the first batch of colonists to the new star system. The construction and equipment of the Ariadna reached its final stages. The next step was to recruit a crew of colonists. Given the joint ownership of the project, the recruitment process took place mainly in the European Union, the United States, the Russian Federation, and a few candidates from other nationalities made it into the final crew. The expedition was structured following technical and military parameters. Along with the ship's flight crew and scientific team, two military contingents were created, one American and one European, the latter comprising mainly of British and French troops. The Russian Federation contributed a whole regiment of Cossack troops and their families that were to found the traditional Cossack settlement capable of carrying out both military tasks and agriculture and industrial labor. A number of European, Russian, and American private citizens were accepted as colonists, and entire families were encouraged to enlist, provided they could include at least 2 eligible technicians or qualified workers. The journey was planned so that all non-essential personnel would travel in a state of cryostasis, at least until the gate was crossed. Meanwhile, the spacecraft was to be piloted by a rotating bare-bones crew aided by fully automated systems. Upon reaching a suitable orbit around Dawn, a module would be disengaged to create orbit descent facilities. Only then would a military crew be thawed and lowered to the ground to establish a safe perimeter for the first settlement and explore the area. After this, the second phase was completed, and the settlers would be progressively reanimated to help build the first permanent land structures. From space, Delta Pavonis was charted in its entirety, and the continents and major islands were given the names of fictional lands from the great works of literature. Disembarkation was a general success, and the area was secured with 0 casualties. The first structures were prepared to receive the landing of the Ariadna. Preliminary surveys revealed the existence of several mineable ore seams, both north and south of the settlement. Resuscitation of civilian personnel, a requisite for the final landing of the craft, was carried out, and technical failure loss rate under 1.5% was achieved, well within acceptable limits. While this took place, Earth prepared to launch the Aurora, a second, bigger seed ship. Tragically, the Aurora never arrived at its destination. When the wormhole collapsed on the passing spacecraft, the Aurora was lost and the Dawn system was left isolated from the rest of humanity. Their lack of long-range astronomical sensors meant the crew of the Ariadna was oblivious to the collapse of the gate. Colonization project continued normally as per the original plan. After months, the definitive landing of the Ariadna mothership finally took place. The gargantuan craft served as an interim shelter and was progressively transformed into a permanent building. Around it, more and more modules were assembled as dwellings, scientific facilities, and storage units. This area would ultimately receive the name MAT. While the MAT was being built, the colonists were sequentially resuscitated to help with the ever-increasing workload involved in the creation of a new home. Once the first phase was completed, all colonists were reanimated and a productive social system was in place. A series of genuine military expansion campaigns were greenlit. The Cossack contingent took it upon itself to organize the defense and security of the settlement, while the rest of the military created forward outposts far from Ariadnan borders. In the eastern mountain range, the first contact with the locals, the antipodes, took place. Despite their surprisingly complex society, they were regarded as mere wild animals, and following preventative protocols, the soldiers set out to destroy any and all villages found during their scouting missions. The 1st U.S. Ranger Division was able to locate numerous antipode settlements on the other side of the eastern mountain range. This provoked a bloody encounter with the so-called River Tribe, whose warriors showed astonishing bellicosity. Attempts at communicating with the natives proved unsuccessful. In the following months, the 1st Division suffered heavy casualties as a result of coordinated River Tribe attacks. In response to the growing threat of fortified settlement, Mount Sion, the Wall, was built as a bastion in defense of the Ariadnan eastern border. In the response of the growing threat of fortified settlement, Mount Sion, the Wall, was built as a bastion for the defense of the Ariadnan eastern border. In light of the radio silence from Earth, the increasingly unmanageable situation forced Ariadnans to rethink their politics. A number of dissenting voices started demanding cultural pure areas to increase collaboration and productivity. Cossacks and Southern Europeans took control of Mat and founded a Cossack majority nation called Rodinia, the motherland. American descendants settled at the Wall, declaring U.S. Ariadna the 51st state of the Union. English and Scottish settlers founded Caledonia around a prosperous mining town called Scone near the Hadrian Mountains. The French created a settlement, Marienburg, at the natural road between Rodinia and the northern mines, and declared themselves the Franco-Ariadnan Republic of Merovingia. This segregation produced a new set of economic necessities in order to build new structures for each town. This, coupled with the division of the available resources, gave birth to an era of scarcity known as the Depression. The Cossacks capitalized on the Depression to consolidate their power in Rodinia. They started offering their services and their organizational model to the Ariadnan Council. The Cossack proposal was successful on the grounds that they had proven capable of maintaining control and even expanding via a series of self-sustaining settlements between Rodinia and the limits of the human dominion marked by the Wall. By this point, there was general consensus among Ariadnans that the Aurora would never arrive, and that the prevailing sentiment was that they had been forsaken by Earth. Meanwhile, the growing tensions between the Cossack government and the outer settlements continued to exacerbate in the light of the antipode incursions. As an answer, compulsory military service was instated, and the military and officer school of Novocossack was built, both throwbacks to Cossack military traditions. Radical positions were increasingly rejected in favor of a climate of collaboration against the crisis situation. Tensions did not disappear overnight, but their consequences lessened in intensity and body count. Marienburg established a fruitful alliance with the Rodinia government, igniting a golden age of expansion for both. The Wall and Scone, on the other hand, were reluctant to unite forces with Rodinia and maintain their isolationists, aggressive stances, only to be ultimately pressured into accepting an alliance to create a single worldwide human government in Ariadna. Despite their words of support, both settlements were patently unhappy with the solution, and it was assumed that they would try to regain their independence as soon as they had a chance. Tessium is a very lightweight nanomaterial with a high molecular density and valuable superconducting capabilities. It is extremely rare in the human sphere, but surprisingly abundant in the form of ore seams in the Ariadnan soil. Processing this ore is exceedingly difficult, which means that Ariadnans, in spite of their formidable mining production, are unable to exploit the full potential of the strategic resource. Nevertheless, the immense industrial utility of Tessium has reshaped the economy and culture of all Ariadnan nations. During the expansion phase, a series of violent storms, accompanied by extreme temperature drops, ravaged the northernmost latitudes of the main continent. The intense cold and snow caused a massive antipode exodus towards the southern regions. Demographic pressures, unfavorable living conditions, and deep-seated resentment amongst humans culminated in the Second Antipode Offensive. The Antipode war chiefs formed an alliance and led their tribes against the Ariadnans on all fronts in what would soon become a war of total annihilation. The Antipodes suffered the most and were ultimately driven off, but they left behind significant Ariadnan casualties. However, the bloodshed served to tighten the bonds of fraternity among Ariadnans, who had to fight side by side regardless of their political beliefs. Cossack, French, Scottish, and American all fought and died together. The evacuation of threatened towns and the subsequent refugee exodus contributed to blending the different populations and blurring their cultural differences. One of the consequences of the Second Antipode Offensive was the birth of so-called dog faces, human antipode hybrids. Pregnant women who had been bitten by an antipode and managed to survive the ordeal sometimes gave birth to mutated children with hybrid genomes. Despite the initial shock and rejection, the mothers often chose to keep and care for their babies, who proved to be just as affectionate as a human child, if somewhat hairier. Still, to the other cautious Ariadnan society, dog faces were seen as abhorrent and treated as second-class citizens. Towards the end of the consolidation phase, Rodinia introduced a substantial tax increase to offset the cost of the space plan with the gains of the economic windfall. This unpopular measure was seen by the separatist politicians as an opportunity to rouse the unhappy citizenry against the Rodinia government. A peaceful protest in front of the Cossack-controlled government offices was violently suppressed in a move that would spark a revolution and be marked as the start of the separatist wars. U.S. Ariadnans, Merovingians, and Caledonians claimed to be fighting for freedom, while the Cossacks allegedly defended the unity and shared progress. Their positions were irreconcilable, and the politics soon gave way to arms. The separatist wars, like any civil wars, were bitter and bloody. The separatists bunkered down in their territories, ready to defend them to the death, but also isolating themselves from their neighbors and potential allies against the Cossack troops. This isolation proved to be their undoing. Eventually, a costly Cossack victory served to create a federal statute that bound the three secessionist states to Rodinia. The subdued nations were given a modicum of self-governing power to soothe the impact of the defeat. It was the official birth of the federated nation of Ariadna. The end of the separatist war saw the professionalization of the street sport called dog bowl, dominated by dog faces and the odd, big human. Dog bowl, whose brutal rules can be condensed into no blood, no foul, has become Ariadnan's favorite sport. Each important city has its own professional team, and the many regional leagues culminate with the momentous event that is the Five Nations Championship, which pits the national teams of Caledonia, U.S. Ariadna, Merovingia, the Cossack Mat, and Tartary, the more remote provinces. Dog bowl has the indirect effect of helping improve the status of dog faces in the Ariadnan society by making some of them into sports heroes. Decades after the separatist wars, satellite networks detected something that would disrupt the hard-earned Ariadnan stability. The contact was with the Pan-Oceanian scout ship, the Paz Neridi. By the twist of fate, the Pan-Oceanians had located a new wormhole to the Dawn system. In less than 2 months, Yujing military forward ship, the Lao Fang, followed the steps of the N. The nearly 2 centuries of old Ariadnan isolation had come to an end. Ariadna had met the rest of humanity once more. Ariadnans did not receive their visitors with open arms, but instead saw their feelings of abandonment by Earth rekindled. The boldness with which Pan-Oceania and Yujing both established their own outposts on the planet did not help ease the tension among Ariadnan leaders. Intercession by the O12 diplomatic delegation helped calm the atmosphere, but did nothing to impede the encroaching expansionism of the two powers throughout the unexplored parts of Dawn. An urgent special meeting of the Concilium was arranged to discuss Ariadnan's political status. The situation was delicate, as every power in the sphere expected to profit from the fateful re-encounter. Pan-Oceania's attitude towards Ariadnan autonomy was one of vehement opposition, claiming Ariadna was as its sovereign territory as much as Ariadnan founding nationalities belonged to the now Pan-Oceanic countries. However, the votes of Haqqislam and the Nomad Nation, and most importantly Yujing, were the key in granting Ariadna the status of a sovereign independent nation. While politicians dragged out the issue, the military of the two foremost powers of the human sphere hurriedly consolidated their outposts, fortifying them before the attentive and outraged eyes of Ariadnan scouts. Expertly navigating the legal vacuum, the Pan-Oceanic and Yujing governments sold the exploitation rights to every inch of Don soil with some potential for profit that didn't have an Ariadnan flag sticking out of it. Mega corporations started landing on Don and stepping on everybody's toes, including each other's. It was not uncommon for Pan-Oceanic and Yujing to both sell the same piece of land to different companies. On occasion, when new owners arrived at the land they had acquired in the international market, they found Nomad or Haqqislamite facilities already toiling away, brandishing a deed previously sold by the Ariadna government. In response to the production delays, many corporations hired the services of mercenary companies. In order to halt the escalation of violence, Ariadna attempted a mass disarmament of mercenaries, to the outrage of megacorporations, who saw the Ariadnan government as the principal threat to their bottom line. Pressured by the corporate giants, the powers of the sphere were forced to intervene and defend their interest, accelerating the situation to what would become as the Ariadnan commercial conflicts. The feud soon evolved into a multipolar, free-for-all confrontation, forcing Ariadna to strike an alliance with Haqqislam and the Nomad Nation in order to defend against Pan-Oceanic and Yujing. This helped further escalate the conflict, and skirmishes turned into full-blown battles between corporate troops, mercenaries, regular troops, guerrilla units, and militias. The Ariadnan side, using its knowledge of the terrain, was able to hold its ground against the multi-pronged attacks. Just when the spiral of destruction started to lose what little sense it had, the O12 finally intervened, and did so decisively. Diplomatic clampdowns and Bureau Aegis troops fell upon the Yujing and Pan-Oceanic interests on Don, deactivating the conflicts with subtlety of a sledgehammer. The controversial issue of exploitation rights was conclusively settled in the concilium by diplomatic means. The areas of influence were distributed by an O12 expert committee, and a so-called exclusion zone where no one was allowed to establish settlements or prospecting facilities was created around the Ariadnan territories. However, a new age of prosperity for Ariadna was yet to arrive. The deal struck by the O12 left no one happy and is regarded with open contempt by the great corporations, so the current situation is one of uneasy stalemate. Until lawyers and politicians find a way to settle the issue conclusively, diverting the expansionist appetites of the great powers and appeasing the wariness of the Ariadnans, Don will continue to be a powder keg. After the secession of American, French, and Scottish regions during the Depression, the Cossacks of the original foundation chose to name Rodinia, the motherland, for their area of influence. After their victory in the separatist wars, Rodinia pushed for the name Ariadna to be adopted by the country that united the descendants of all Earth's colonists. The demonym Ariadnan soon caught on as an identity symbol that encompassed all other nationalist settlements. The Cossacks are the most populous cultural group in Rodinia and have been able to establish a reasonably fair and balanced government. The main tenet of their political ideology is straightforward: in hard times, tighten your belt and help out. Cossacks have endeavored to maintain rings of militarized settlements to secure territory, and have built a bare-bones infrastructure that is serviceable, but if not comfortable. The Cossacks were the true architects of the current political climate in Ariadna. Their quest for unity and their fear of a segregated human population would not survive the planet and its antipodes. Their quest for unity and their fear that the segregated human population would not survive the planet and its antipodes have guided their interactions with other Ariadnan colonies from the start. But even the most critical analysis of Cossack policies cannot deny that a riven Ariadna would have never been able to face off and persevere against the great powers of the human sphere. Nowadays, Cossack politicians, advised by representatives of other colonies, manage the Ariadnan relationships with the rest of the sphere. Rodinia is divided into two distinct territories: the metropolis, the Mat, the first human settlement and the biggest city on the planet, and Tartary, the distant colonial areas northwest of Ariadna, following the Mirror Sea coast. The latter province is a place where antipode raids, attacks by foreign troops, and even the odd combined army foray are a daily occurrence. The flow of trade and industry on Ariadna follows roads and, most importantly, rail lines, of which the Cossacks are big enthusiasts. The Great Ariadnan Railway, the Trans-Antarctic, is one of the longest in the human sphere. It crosses Tartary from the Mat to Delani, and the northern coast of the Mirror Sea, to the Cousteau Ocean shoreline. Trans-Antarctic freight and transport is the lifeblood of the inland, and has allowed and facilitated exploration and population of the vast Tartary plains. Trans-Antarctic trains are reinforced and often heavily armed with machine gun nests atop their cars to protect against antipode tribes and lowland bandits. Let's talk a little bit about U.S. Ariadna. During the Depression, the descendants of American NASA researchers and Ranger Division soldiers migrated eastward to the Spinal Mountain Range with the intention of founding their own state, which they felt would rightfully be the 51st state of the American United States. They channeled the spirit of the Founding Fathers and created a community openly supportive of personal freedom and of the American way of life. These Ariadnan Americans seamlessly continued the society they had left behind, mid-21st century United States, in the Ariadnan American region, to study the virtually unchanged shard of American history. U.S. Ariadna has its own Coca-Cola factory, a once famous long-defunct soft drink brand, and myriad old-fashioned fast food chains. They speak the archaic English of the 21st century and maintain many centuries-old cultural quirks. U.S. Ariadnans see themselves as frontier people, descended from the strongest of the strong who managed to survive the worst of an implacable planet. U.S. Ariadna is the most ethically diverse region on Dawn. Of the original American expedition, most NASA scientists were of Anglo-Saxon or Asian descent, while the members of the Ranger Division were chiefly Latino or African American. As a result, the U.S. Ariadnan region has a racial diversity that contrasts strongly with the homogeneous populations of the rest of the planet. The U.S. Ariadnan nation comprises the entirety of the Ariadnan eastern border. The region has seen constant conflict with the antipodes, and more recently with invaders from bigger powers of the human sphere. Eternally besieged, U.S. Ariadna must be able to keep all enemy forces at bay in order to guarantee its own survival. The colony plays a critical strategic role in the defense of the Ariadnan territory, which has a double effect of forcing them to work side by side with Cossack forces to limit foreign interference in Dawn, while simultaneously keeping them from participating fully in any Ariadnan joint operations due to their border surveillance responsibilities. On to Caledonia. When a team of sapper engineers found a rich seam of Tessium in the northern range, which would later be known as the Hadrian Mountains, the 45th Highlander Rifles Regiment, the Galwegian, was mobilized immediately to defend the area. It was a permanent post, and the soldiers' families were relocated as well. More importantly, the colonists made a point of appointing English-speaking Anglo-Saxon miners to that destination to facilitate the cohabitation with their protectors. It was the birth of scone, which soon grew to be Ariadna's main producer of Tessium. Heavy industry facilities sprouted around the mines, and Scone soon became a city with all the bad that entails, and some of the good. In the spirit of self-sufficiency, a sizable part of Ariadnan Anglo-Saxon population, which is the English, the Welsh, Scottish, the descendants of the Highlander Division soldiers, Irish, and some Danish, migrated to the foothills of the Hadrian Mountains. By virtue of their demographic prevalence, the Scottish influenced the culture of the area much more profoundly than others, to the point that the region would later identify itself as Caledonia, after the old Roman name for barbaric parts of Britannia, northern of the Hadrian's Wall. The social structure of Caledonia is heavily shaped by clans, family-based groups in which all members claim descent from a common ancestor, the clan founder. Several families can be part of the same clan by virtue of their political or economic family ties. Traditional stereotyping has not been kind to Caledonians, often seen as brutish and uneducated, more raucous than U.S. Ariadnans, and almost more self-aggrandizing than Cossacks. There are annual drinking contests to settle this. The craggy, implacably cold land of Caledonia has hammered its people into a race apart. Selecting for endurance and tenacity, Caledonians are fiercely independent, not only because they mistrust the meddling hands of Matt, but because they enjoy the isolation of the Hadrian Mountains. Now let's talk about Merovingia. In the years before the Depression, a group of families of French origin took up residence in the natural crossroads between Matt and the eastern and northern borders. They called their town Marienburg, as a nod of respect to the women of the French Republic. With the flow of travelers, the town prospered and became an important trade hub. The city was even able to survive the Depression despite the dramatic fall in traffic over Ariadnan roads. And stories of success in the city led many to move there in search of jobs. Marienburg was the destination of choice for many descendants of the colonists, and researchers and soldiers from France, Benelux, and, to a lesser extent, Austria, Italy, and Germany. The great majority was Franco, and the resulting culture reflected in the name chosen for the region, Merovingia. Without a profitable source of raw materials, Merovingians learned to thrive on trade. They soon created colonies at the key points across Ariadna to secure their control over traffic of goods. Before anyone knew, these Marienburg branches made a name for themselves, and the emergent sense of community was the foundation of the Franco-Ariadnan Republic of Merovingia. Merovingians are the most well-traveled of Ariadnans, other than the Cossack troops, of course, and they carry with them a strong spirit of trade and the reputation as skilled negotiators. Living up to their foundational stereotypes, Merovingians are fiercely protective of their culture and very patriotic, but they are also known as the enterprising and lively, bold people. Ariadnan army is a perfect reflection of the character of its peoples and the different regions in which they live. Scouting, forward, and infiltration units are the mainstay of the army, busily exploring and claiming new territories. The Ariadnan line infantry has a marked borderland demeanor, earned by generations of keeping the peace against the antipode threat. Ariadnans more than make up for their technological lag with tenacity and clever use of their planet's resources. Antipodes, dog warriors, and Tessium help level the playing field against more gimmicky adversaries. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you for listening to my little rant on U.S. Ariadna. If you'd like me to cover a faction, please leave it in the comments. If you are interested in more lore for the game of War Machine and Hordes, Warm Hordes, I have a sister channel run by my partner in crime, Josiah the Heavy Flame of Freya, called Allocating Focus, that discusses the lore and the factions and the world itself of the Iron Kingdoms. If you like tabletop gaming, laughing, or both, check out my tabletop gaming podcast channel, The Tabletop Talkers with a Z. And that's it for this week.